talk about generational blind spots. Can you explain what that means and how it can have such an impact on future generations?
A couple of things. In Leading from the Heart, I think it's one of the earlier chapters. I have people do this family history inventory or assessment. We look at, okay, where were your grandparents born and what was their socioeconomic status? What was it like for them culturally, socially? And you ask, well, Doc, well, what has that got to do with me? Well, the truth is a whole lot because all of that affected what they poured into your parents, and that shaped your parents' core values or lack thereof, or their beliefs, their expectations, the messages that they told themselves about themselves. Well, if that's what your parents, and let's say you're like me, I'm an adopted kid. So if it's not your parents, your caregivers, all of that got imprinted. And trust me, if whatever you saw between 3 and 7 years old, that's your default. Meaning, when something happens, especially something that's triggering your limbic system or your amygdala, that middle part of your brain that is in fight or flight mode, you default to what you saw, what you heard, how people treated you, their expectations of you. Now, even more, that is that period of your life, like between 2 and 3, where your first experiences with shame and guilt come in. Between 2 and 4, that's when you are now perfecting understanding communication. And it's not words. It's yeah, okay. You realize if mommy's pitch, daddy's pitch, the person that's caring for you, if their tone is a certain way, if that pitch and tone have a facial expression accompanying it, then the words, the inflection of the words. Well, by the time you're 7, so to answer or address what you just said, if that's what your default mode turns on in order for you to survive at 35, 45, hell, even 50 or 65, it's something that you must be aware of because that awareness can shift you from your obnoxious self governing your actions and allowing your omniscient self to take over.
Yeah, it's really interesting in looking at these generational blind spots. Um, looking back on my life, my dad's father was not well engaged, very, very absent, not as engaged as a normal dad would be. My dad felt like when he showed up every day and he was at his job every day, he didn't get fired from every job he ever had like my grandfather. He did a lot of things that were just he was loyal. He showed up every day, he came home every day, and it was he was trying to do the opposite of what he was doing. And when I look back on even coaching, when you don't have a present parent and
Mhm.
my dad was very intense. He wanted to give me lots of lessons and lots of intensity. So one of the ways I combated with that growing up was when I had my boys, I started coaching them, which allowed me to coach all the kids and it leveled me off. So if it was one on one, it was a lot of intensity and I could feel that the way that I grew up would start to come out. And I learned both my boys have been much more successful in their sports because I believe I learned from my father in a positive way. I'm not making it negative. I'm grateful that he did it the way he did. But that generational blind spot was one where he just learned, hey, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to pay 100% of attention. And that's not always good either. So, I learned a lot from that. And I really resonated well with that topic.
Yeah. Well, I would also say that when we look back at our ancestral origins, our grandparents, our parents, they took what they had to work with, did the best that they can. You can see this with what you described in the relationship between your grandfather and your father. But if we stop and think about your grandfather and extend a little compassion and a little grace at that season of time, and I'm going to guess that your grandfather more than likely was born between 1900 and 1930. Those men were either workaholic, churchaholic, or alcoholic, or a combination thereof. They didn't have internet. They sure the hell weren't tethered to cell phones. and times were hard. You know, that was World War One, Depression. And then we have to factor in some science. Sounds like your grandfather may have been an introvert. Well, who do introverts talk to more than anyone else? Themselves. So there's that. And then we don't know what his father gave him in terms of a struggle, or not even in the family, but the culture of the society. But what your dad did was said, you know, I see how that affected me. I'm not going to let that affect my son. So I'm going to show up differently. And your dad leaned into being hyper accountable and being very present. You looked at what your father did and said, hey, man, you know, you passed me a baton and I like where you passed it, but I'm going to take it a step further. And now that I'm you and these boys are me, I'm going to course correct and give them what I wasn't given, though I was given a lot. And as when just what you said, um, how that contributed to their lives, amplified their presence, especially in sports, that resilience and that self-efficacy that you inspired and are currently still inspiring, is showing itself in big dividends. But I think the greatest part of this is off the field too. When people seem validated, when they feel safe and secure, they tend to thrive. And that's why you and your boys are thriving.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great breakdown. And I think the other interesting dynamic there is, we all men want their boys or their sons to be greater than they are. They want them to be a better version of
Mhm.
us, and I think that's a wonderful thing. So if I can pass on the foundation, and then the boys can take it and raise the bar, that
Mhm.
sounds like a great way to be, because we're just elevating the family and the genealogy and all the things that make sense. That's a way to have generational strength.
Yeah, definitely.
What?
As
Go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
please. No, please. You go ahead. You had a thought. I want to hear it.
Yeah, we miss the opportunities that we don't take. What I mean by that is being mindfully present is one of the most useful tools that we have at our disposal. And it's a tool that we can build something with. But if we're stuck in survival mode, if the part of your brain that is in fight or flight, and many of us are and don't even know it because in prior evolution, it was a growl in the bushes or a sound in the middle of the night. All of a sudden you grab your spear, your club, whatever, and your pupils dilate so you can see better in the showers. I mean, in the shadows, and your sense of hearing becomes heightened. But we're not Fred Flintstone anymore. What happens now is you get the same exact response because you saw a text message with the wrong name on it. You looked at an email subject line sends you right there, and you're just as much as in fight or flight as if a guy is pointing a gun at you. The worst part of that is becomes latent because it is ongoing stress. And then that's compounded by the things that are going on, whatever part of the world you're in. But if particular, if you're in the United States right now, we're in a very divided, hostile environment that none of us asked for. We're in that environment mentally, emotionally, spiritually, social, and economically. So it's a good idea to be aware of what do I need? What's going on in and around me right now? And what is my relationship with it?
Yeah, it's good. What I was thinking is exactly the direction you went, and that is, why so many men, especially, our top performers at work can handle all kinds of levels of stress. One example is I interviewed a Green Beret who was a superhero. I mean, the guy's been an amazing human. He's done all kinds of things. Only special forces person to go back with a prosthetic leg back to war. And we actually were talking about how he could be calm in the utmost chaos, but somebody cuts him off at the Dunkin' Donuts line, and
Yeah.
he's ready to lose it. Or we walk in the door at home, and the things that we are that set someone off are the smallest little details. So YouTube has this cool feature where they pick the next video for you, and it's right here on this screen. So I hope you enjoy this next video.